We often focus on the big splashy headlines, but sometimes the real story, the critical stuff, it's buried in the details, right?
Mhm.
In documents most people never get to see.
Exactly.
Today, you're getting a look inside one of those. We're diving into a protected whistleblower disclosure. This is the kind of thing that lands on congressional desks.
Hmm.
And it's not just some minor IT issue. We're talking about serious questions about government data security and maybe even how transparent things are when potential threats pop up.
That's right. What we're looking at here are parts of a formal disclosure, including a sworn statement from Daniel J. Berulis. He's a DevSecOps Architect at the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB.
Okay.
And crucially, he's not just, anyone. This guy has almost 20 years in the field, background in national security, top secret clearance eligibility. He knows cybersecurity inside and out. He understands the stakes.
So a credible source raising concerns. Let's unpack this. The disclosure talks about some uh, really unusual activity around this team called the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE for short.
Hmm? Right, DOGE.
It seems to have kicked off around the last week of February 2025.
Hmm.
Berulis mentions his supervisor saying the CIO wanted everyone physically in the office because this DOGE team was inbound.
Which is already a bit unusual, maybe.
Yeah, and get this, even before they showed up, these DOGE engineers were asking for super specific details about the NLRB's entire IT infrastructure. Software, hardware, cloud versus servers, everything.
It sounds like reconnaissance almost, mapping the digital territory before setting foot inside.
Exactly. Then they physically arrive around March 3rd, and the
Wow.
description is, well, it's something. A black SUV, police escort.
Yeah, that's not your standard interagency visit, is it? It feels very theatrical.
Right. And they apparently kept interactions with the actual NLRB IT staff pretty limited, which makes you ask why all the cloak and dagger.
What was the need for that kind of entrance, that level of separation?
And then it gets weirder with the user accounts for this DOGE team. The instructions were apparently to just ignore standard operating procedures.
How so?
No logs, no records of who created the accounts, just make them.
Wow, okay, that's that Security 101, violator right there. You need logs, you need an audit trail. Who has access? When was it granted? Skipping that is deeply problematic.
And the level of access they got. Tenant owner in Azure. Can you explain what that means? Because Berulis says it's even more access than the NLRB's own CIO typically has.
Yeah, tenant owner is basically the God mode for their Microsoft cloud environment. It's not just admin rights, it's root level control over everything. Think of the NLRB's cloud presence as a huge office building.
Okay.
The CIO might be the CEO running the company inside, but the tenant owner. They own the building. They have the master keys to every single door, every floor, including the security office. They can change locks, build new secret rooms, even disable the cameras, potentially without anyone knowing.
So massive risk if that kind of account gets compromised.
Absolutely enormous. You could create hidden resources, tamper with logs to erase your footprints, basically become invisible within their system.
And Berulis says they actually found evidence of weird accounts, using a CISA security tool, no less.
Right. CISA's scuba tool.
They found 2 high-permissioned admin accounts that the NLRB IT folks couldn't explain. One was literally named NLRB admin. Another had a generic admin name, not part of their standard setup.
Which immediately begs the question, who created them and why? Were they related to DOGE? The instructions given to NLRB staff add to this strange picture, too.
And what were they told?
Basically, give the DOGE team any accounts they ask for, don't interfere, help them if they ask directly. And there was mention of interviewing employees, but apparently that never happened.
So this team was operating with a lot of autonomy, very little oversight from the host agency.
But that's certainly how it looks from this disclosure, yes.
Okay, so then things get technical.
Mm.
Around March 4th, Berulis and his team find something odd and unusual container record, and some storage tokens that expired way faster than they should have. What's a container in this context?
Think of it like a sealed box, a sort of opaque virtual node running on the network. You can run code inside it, processes, applications, but what's happening inside isn't easily visible from the outside. It's good for isolating things, but it can also be used to hide activity.
Okay, so potentially discrete.
Mhm.
And the expired tokens.
Specifically, a shared access signature token, or SAS token. It's like a temporary key to access a specific bit of cloud storage. This one had a really short expiration time.
Why does that matter?
Because a short lifespan makes it much harder to trace what that key was used for after the fact. If you're trying to cover your tracks or make analysis difficult later, that's one way you might do it. Again, it suggests someone might be trying to avoid detection.
Now, March 5th rolls around. More missing pieces.
Mhm.
Records for some network resources vanish. And a key monitoring tool, the Network Watcher in Azure,
Turned off.
turned off. That's like the security cameras being switched off right when something suspicious might be happening.
Exactly. And around the same time, the application development team noticed some strange behavior on their main database, the next-gen system.
Right.
But when they went to check the logs for that specific period, nothing. The logs weren't available. It's like that window of time was just gone from the record.
Missing logs again. That's a recurring theme here.
It is. And it's a huge problem for any investigation. Logs are your digital footprints. If they're missing precisely when weird stuff is happening, it strongly suggests someone is actively trying to hide their actions.
And the network weirdness continued, right? That same day, March 5th, a big spike in outgoing network traffic.
Yes, a large spike seen on their Palo Alto interface. Lots of data leaving, but crucially, not a corresponding large amount of data coming in.
Which isn't typical for, say, updates or normal operations.
Generally, no. It's often an indicator of potential data exfiltration data being copied out. The disclosure mentions no major security alerts were triggered, which could mean a few things. Maybe the attack was sophisticated, maybe their tools weren't mature enough yet.
They mentioned the CIO was working on improving tools later, right?
Yes, that lack of mature internal threat detection was noted. And interestingly, when they tried to investigate where this outbound traffic was going, they saw a big jump in DNS requests.
What does that signify?
It could mean the system or actor involved was doing a lot of lookups, maybe trying to connect to many different external places, or it could just reflect the difficulty the internal team had in actually tracking the destination due to the tools available at the time. It added to the confusion.
Okay, moving to March 6th. Now we see hints of accounts being, perhaps, created and then quickly deleted.
The naming convention, DOGE SA, suggested that pattern, yes. Creation and possible deletion around that time frame.
Plus concerns about just general admin accounts floating around without proper auditing.
Which represents a potential vulnerability, absolutely. Unaudited admin accounts are risky.
And then a sudden, unexplained change in access controls in their Entra ID system, an MF.
Multi-factor authentication, that extra security step, like a code to your phone. It was found disabled for mobile devices in their Office 365 environment.
Even though policy required it.
Exactly, despite a mandate for it. It's like having a rule for strong locks on all doors, but deciding not to use them on the back door. It just weakens security significantly.
So accounts possibly being manipulated, access controls changed without authorization, security features like MFA disabled.
It all starts to paint a picture of someone deliberately manipulating the environment, doesn't it? Gaining access, doing something, and maybe trying to erase the evidence or make future access easier.
And then users actually started having problems. Login issues reported around the same day, March 6th.
Right, which led Berulis to discover that the conditional access policies had been updated recently.
And these are?
Think of them as the bouncers at the club door. They check your ID, see if you're on the list, decide if you can come in, and maybe where you're allowed to go inside. They dictate who can access what, from where, under what conditions.
And these were changed with no documentation, no approval.
Correct. Updated without following the proper change management process. The security team, the information assurance folks, they apparently weren't aware. That's a major breakdown in process and another serious red flag suggesting unauthorized modifications.
So March 7th. Remember those containers we talked about?
The virtual boxes, yes.
Turns out, Berulis confirmed the NLRB's own development teams for their main systems and admin systems. They don't use them, not even for testing.
Which makes that container record found earlier even more anomalous. It really shouldn't have been there based on their known practices.
And then there's the money trail. A sudden 8% jump in their monthly cloud bill.
Yeah, an 8% month-over-month increase, but without any new resources being officially deployed or requested.
So where did the cost come from?
Berulis speculates it could be from high-cost resources being spun up and then quickly deleted before they were properly accounted for, or maybe unauthorized changes to how existing resources were configured or used. Cloud billing anomalies like that, without explanation, are often suspicious.
Okay, this next one seems really specific. Threat hunting logs showed 3 downloads of code libraries from GitHub.
Yes, external libraries. And the key things here are: 1, the NLRB and its contractors apparently don't use these specific libraries. 2, their own development is done via automated pipelines, so manual downloads like this are unnecessary and shouldn't happen.
And there was a technical clue, the Edo profile flag.
Right. That suggests the download wasn't someone clicking a button in a browser. It indicates it was likely programmatic, triggered by a script or another automated process.
Why download external code libraries you don't use programmatically?
It's a common tactic in cyber attacks. You might download tools, components for malware, or libraries that help automate further steps of an attack. Doing it programmatically helps avoid detection and bypasses normal user workflows. It's definitely cause for concern.
Then around March 10th, more security controls found disabled. Things that should have stopped insecure mobile devices from logging in.
Plus, internal alerting and monitoring systems were noted as being turned off, and those MFA changes were still an issue.
And a very specific action, a manual download of a user roster from the database.
Yes, by a mission systems lead developer. This roster apparently contained contact info for respondents and outside lawyers involved in NLRB cases. Sensitive stuff.
Okay, so a manual download of sensitive contact info right in the middle of all this other chaos. And did they figure out what those downloaded GitHub libraries were for?
They did. The descriptions found were quite revealing. One library was explicitly described on GitHub as using Amazon Web Services' huge range of IP addresses as a proxy, meaning it could make web requests look like they're coming from tons of different places, almost infinite IPs. The description specifically mentioned using this for web scraping and brute forcing.
Trying to break into things, basically.
Or gathering data discreetly, yes. Another tool found was specifically for rotating IP addresses during web requests, again useful for scraping or brute force attacks. And a third was a headless browsing tool.
What's that?
It lets you control a web browser using code without any visible window opening up. Think of it like having a robot surf the web for you. It's used for automated testing, but also very commonly for scraping data from websites automatically.
So tools downloaded that are useful for scraping data and potentially launching attacks. And they still don't know where that user roster ended up.
The disclosure states the destination of the potentially exfiltrated data, including that roster, remains unknown. These tools definitely suggest reconnaissance or data gathering intentions far outside normal NLRB operations.
Which leads us to the actual data outflow. Berulis tracked data leaving the main case system, Exogen, gigabytes of it.
Yes, potentially a very large amount. He used the analogy of a full stack of encyclopedias, if it was text, to give a sense of scale. And this was followed by that large, roughly 10 gigabyte spike in outbound network traffic overall.
That's significant.
Hugely significant. Direct data egress from core databases like that is highly unusual and bypasses typical security controls. The volume suggests a substantial amount of information was copied. And the fact they couldn't be sure exactly what was taken or if it was compressed to hide the volume, well, it just compounds the seriousness.
So Berulis takes all this to the CIO, Prem Abervasmi, on March 7th, flags the data exfiltration concerns, the monitoring gaps.
Yes, laid out the indicators they'd gathered.
And the CIO's initial reaction.
According to the disclosure, the CIO concluded case data was likely involved. He actually formed a leadership group proactively to focus on insider threats and held regular meetings. He acknowledged the lack of real-time internal threat detection and response capabilities.
So took it seriously at first.
It appears so. They shifted budget for better tools, shut down a public endpoint that might have been vulnerable, corrected some of those rogue policies. Positive initial steps.
But the weirdness didn't stop there, did it? Around March 11th, the Exgen system itself showed abnormal metrics.
High response times, increased network output, metrics consistent with the period of that large data outflow event described earlier. It reinforces the timeline.
And then, this is maybe the most chilling part for me, the Russia connection.
Ah, yes. Shortly after the DOGE accounts were created, the system logs showed increased login attempts being blocked by access policy, specifically because they were coming from outside the country.
And where from?
Over 20 attempts logged from an IP address resolving to Primorsky Krai, Russia, and they were using the newly created DOGE credentials.
Yeah. So very soon after these special high-privilege accounts are made, someone in Russia is trying to use them to log in.
It's incredibly alarming. It strongly suggests either those credentials are compromised almost immediately, or perhaps points to something even more direct involving external actors. The speed is suspicious. The origin is obviously highly concerning.
Luckily, they were blocked by policy.
Yes, the policy preventing foreign logins worked in that instance. But the attempt itself is a massive red flag demanding investigation.
And the roadblocks to investigation continued. March 13th couldn't pull connection logs related to some unknown external endpoint.
Right. More missing visibility.
Then March 17th, the network team basically throws up their hands and says they can't analyze the outbound traffic because the tools are misconfigured or missing.
Yeah, essentially flying blind at that point regarding outbound data flows, a huge handicap for any security team trying to understand a potential breach.
Plus, more billing spikes around March 19th, hinting again at maybe resources being created and deleted quickly in the mission systems area.
It just adds to the pattern of anomalous activity and potential attempts to hide tracks.
So you have all this piling up. The weird access, the disabled security, the missing logs, the data outflow, the Russia login attempts. Where does it lead internally?
Well, during the week of March 24th, the acting COSO, the head security officer at the time, concluded that all this evidence warranted reporting to U.S. CERT.
That's part of CISA, right? The government's main cybersecurity agency.
Correct. U.S. CERT is the operational arm, the 247 center that coordinates response to major cyber incidents across federal agencies. Think of them as the government's cyber first responders for big events, like the OPM breach response back in 2016.
So the acting CSO says, we need to call in the experts.
Exactly. They launched a formal review, presented the evidence suggesting a serious, potentially ongoing breach, including the potential illegal removal of PII. Reporting to U.S. CERT seemed like the essential next step to get the resources needed to figure out the root cause.
But,
And this is critical, between April 3rd and 4th, the instruction came down. Stop, drop the U.S. CERT reporting, cease the investigation, halt further action.
whoa, just stop, despite everything, including the Russia connection.
That's what the disclosure alleges. Both the acting CISO and Berulis were told to stand down.
That is deeply concerning. Why? The disclosure doesn't say who gave the order or why.
It doesn't specify the source of the order in the excerpts we have, just that the instruction was received. But the implication is huge. Halting an investigation into a potential major breach with foreign fingerprints, that raises serious questions.
So what's Berulis' final take on all this, his professional judgment?
He states that, look, getting absolute definitive proof is hard here because the security tools were immature at the time, logs went missing, monitoring was disabled, making forensics difficult.
Understandable.
But, he argues, when you take all the pieces together, the timeline, the specific technical indicators, the sequence of events, and view it through the lens of something like the ITE, AT, and CK framework.
Which is a standard way to map out attacker techniques.
Exactly. When you look at the whole picture, the convergence of all these anomalies strongly suggests a data breach occurred, likely facilitated by an internal actor, possibly the temporary DOGE team or someone leveraging their access who is actively trying to evade detection and hide what data they took.
And the data potentially lost.
He emphasizes it's sensitive stuff, PII of people and labor cases, confidential business info from NLRB investigations, legal strategies, things not meant for public eyes.
And he stresses that whoever did this needed high-level permissions.
Yes, permissions exceeding almost everyone in the NLRB's IT office, except for maybe 3 very highly audited accounts, which he notes were not implicated in these events.
So his conclusion isn't definitive proof, but a strong evidence-based inference of a serious breach that was potentially covered up or at least not fully investigated.
Precisely. He states his goal in filing the disclosure is to highlight these major red flags that demand a thorough, independent investigation and appropriate legal action. He even notes he tried to disprove his own hypothesis, suggesting a genuine effort to find the truth.
His background and the detail here certainly lend weight to it.
Absolutely. The specific technical details, the timeline alignment, the sheer number of anomalies culminating in that order to halt investigation.
Right.
It paints a very troubling picture.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up for you, the listener. What we have is a highly experienced federal cybersecurity expert, Daniel Berulis, alleging a potential serious data breach at the National Labor Relations Board.
Right.
It involves a temporary team, DOGE, getting unusual high-level access, followed by a cascade of technical red flags, weird accounts, disabled security controls, missing logs, suspicious network activity, evidence of maybe 10 gigs of data being exfiltrated.
And crucially, those blocked login attempts using the new DOGE credentials originating from Russia almost immediately after the accounts were created.
And then perhaps the most disturbing element,
Right.
the allegation that when senior security staff decided this needed escalation to U.S. CERT, the government's cyber incident responders, they were told to stop the reporting and cease the investigation.
Which leaves us and you with a pretty stark question to ponder. In a world full of cyber threats, what does it mean for government security, for transparency, when serious allegations like these surface? Especially when they involve potential foreign actors and an alleged order to stand down on the investigation.
It really makes you think about the security of sensitive government data, doesn't it? And the critical, sometimes difficult role whistleblowers play in bringing potential problems to light. There's definitely a lot to consider here about trust, security, and accountability within our institutions.